So now we have a general understanding of basic weather theory. We know where to get the information from. Now we're going to talk about what that weather information looks like. One of the key units of information that we'll get from weather services is the Aviation Routine Weather Report, also known as a METAR. A METAR is a report of current weather conditions. It's issued hourly or more frequently if changes occur rapidly. It comes in a standard international format and does need to be decoded in order to fully understand. It does look confusing at first, but I guarantee you, after you understand what their format is and how to decode it and you practice a few times, it'll become second nature. You will be required to decode and understand parts of a METAR for your exam, and is also overall just very helpful for you in the future when you're operating your drone and you need up-to-date current weather information. So when you first get a METAR, this is what you'll see. At first glance, it looks very confusing. It looks like a bunch of letters and numbers that don't really make much sense. But much like a sectional chart, it becomes much easier to understand if you understand its format, how it's laid out, and you look at it unit by unit. To start, I'm going to highlight these very quickly to show you what the format looks like, and then we're going to break these down in much more detail. This is what a METAR looks like. The first piece of information is your airport code. Second is your date and time. Next is your wind, direction, and speed. Next is your visibility in statute miles. Next is your ceilings. Next piece of information is your temperature and dew point. Next is your altimeter or pressure. And then the last section are remarks. Again, this is a standard international format. So even though it looks very confusing at first and looks like a jumble of letters and numbers, once you realize the format, you'll realize they're much easier to understand. Now we're going to break these down and explain each piece of information in much more detail. To start, we'll talk about the airport code. In this case, it was KBOS. The K tells us that this is a US airport. Other countries have different letters. The next three tell us what airport specifically it is at. BOS is the airport code for Boston Logan International Airport. All airports have a unique three-letter ICAO airport code. Next is the date and time. The first two numbers identify the day of the month. In this case, this was on the 7th day of the month, so it gives us a 07. The next four show our time. This is on a 24-hour clock, and in this case, this is at 17:54 Zulu time. Zulu time is also known as Coordinated Universal Time. So this is not the local time at the airport. This is the time at UTC or Coordinated Universal Time. The next piece of information tells us the wind direction and the wind speed. The first three numbers are the wind direction in degrees, coming from, not going to. So in this case, they're coming out of direction 310. Now, we'll talk about compass headings and direction in the operations course, but just know that the first three letters on this part of a METAR tell you the direction that the wind is coming from. In this case, 310 is about northwest. The next set of numbers tells us the wind speed. In this case, they were at 19 knots. So 19 KT. KT stands for knots. Sometimes you'll see a G involved in here with another set of numbers. That just tells us that the winds are gusting, and we'll cover a few examples of that later on. The next piece of information is our visibility. If you remember from earlier, most weather stations will give you a max of 10 on a clear day. Sometimes it's 6, but in most cases it's 10. So if you see 10, that doesn't mean that the visibility is only 10 statute miles. It means that's the maximum that they're going to give you. So this was a clear day in Boston. The next piece of information are our ceilings. So you should remember these from the weather portion. There's different codes that tell us different levels of ceiling coverage: clear, few, scattered, broken, or overcast. And then the three numbers tell us the ceiling in altitude in hundreds of feet. So an easy way to figure this out is just add 2 zeros onto the number. So in this case, we had a ceiling few at 4,400 feet, and another ceiling above that, broken, at 12,000 feet. The next piece of information is the temperature/dew point. These are always listed in Celsius. Again, this is not Fahrenheit. These are always listed in Celsius. The M tells us it's negative. This was January in Boston. It was a cold day with a temperature of -4 degrees Celsius and a dew point of -15 degrees Celsius. The next piece of information is our altimeter setting, or our pressure. In this case, it was 2955. If you remember from the weather section, standard is 29.92. So in this case, we were just slightly below average pressure on this day. The next section is remarks. Most of this information is not going to be super relevant for you as a drone pilot, but just know what this information is. In this case, remark A02 just tells us information about what type of weather sensor is available at this station. The other portion of remarks tells us the sea level pressure as well as a more precise temperature and dew point. Again, this is not super relevant for you, anything in the remarks section for unmanned aircraft, but it is helpful to know what this information is so it doesn't confuse you when you see it. Next, we're going to practice a few other METAR decodes so you have a little better understanding of what different things mean. Also highlight a few other important things that you need to know when you're going over METARs. In this first example, this one was taken from San Diego. We know this because the three-letter code for San Diego International Airport is SAN. This was taken on the 7th day of the month at 20:51 Zulu. Wind speeds were still coming out of 310 at 9 knots. Visibility was 10 statute miles with a few ceiling at 4,000 feet and a scattered ceiling at 20,000. Temperature of 18 degrees Celsius and a dew point of 9 degrees Celsius. Altimeter setting of 29.90, and some remarks. So this next one here we see coming out of Buffalo, KBUF. Not going to cover every single thing in this METAR like we did in the last one. Just want to highlight a few key changes that we might see on some other METARs. So in this case, when you look at the winds, you see a little bit more information there. There's a few more numbers and letters. We have 290, so our winds are still coming from direction 290, but now we see 16 G26 KT. That's telling us that the winds aren't just steady at a certain speed, they're actually gusting. So they're steady at 16, gusting up to 26 knots. Additionally, over here you can see this hyphen followed by an S and an N. This SN tells us that there's snow being observed at this weather station. The minus sign next to it, the hyphen, tells us that it's light snow. So on this day in Buffalo, it's very windy, gusting 26 knots, with a little bit of light snow. And then lastly, way over here at the end, we see this money symbol. This tells us that the sensor probably has some maintenance. Some of the sensors might not be working properly, but the money sign tells us that there's maintenance required at this station. Next, we're going to look at this METAR coming out of Providence, KPVD. We see some additional precipitation information over here that's highlighted. RA tells us that there's rain, and the plus sign right before it tells us that it's heavy rain. So just like in that METAR coming out of Buffalo, we see that there was light snow. This is telling us that there's heavy rain with the plus sign. The TS tells us that there's thunderstorms present or observed. So we can see out of this METAR come from Providence that there's heavy rain and thunderstorms when this METAR was reported. Now lastly, if you want to practice this a little bit more and see a few other different variations of what METARs might look like, you're more than welcome to check out aviationweather.gov/data/METAR and play around. You can type in a few different airport codes, maybe some that are near you. You can see what the weather looks like and test yourself. See if there's anything new that you might see and just practice. And if you see anything you don't recognize, a full list of METAR codes and their meanings is available to you on the Drone Ace Quick Study Guide.